CBC Vancouver News.
We feel that this is just overreaching at this point.
With respect to enforcement, it's not unlike with respect to nightclubs.
Passport pushback. Some businesses very vocal as they dig in against the province's vaccine card mandate. And
totally understand the idea that they can't force people to be vaccinated and they can't force you to show that you've been vaccinated.
With so many students coming in, it just makes me personally just feel uncomfortable.
How will it look for post-secondary students? A growing number of schools announced their own requirements, including an alternative for the unvaccinated. Also,
I don't believe that we should be putting our communities at risk based on contingencies.
the Premier promises to bolster future wildfire efforts as this season racks up a $500 million price tag.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Anita is off tonight. I'm Tanya Fletcher. Well, today, BC hit a 4-month COVID high with daily cases. It follows a grim trend of rising pandemic caseloads province-wide. Our Zara Premji is here live now with a breakdown of the latest numbers. So, Zara, how do we reconcile these climbing case numbers with the latest vaccination rates?
Well, Tanya, first off, you said it right there. The numbers have been climbing in the last couple of weeks, and today was no different. Of course, that's a big reason we're seeing new measures, new mask requirements, and soon the vaccine passport. So today, BC recorded 867 new cases of the virus, and a total of 159 people are in hospital right now. Of those, 84 are in the ICU. That's a number that also spiked from 59 just a week ago. But there's some good news. A noticeable jump in people suddenly getting their first dose of the vaccine. Yesterday, 8,529 people received their first dose. So, and since the vaccine card was announced on Monday, there's been more than 25,000 people receiving their first dose. Now, our Justin McElroy broke down the cases of hospitalizations per 100,000 people for the last 2 weeks. And here's what we're seeing. Of those hospitalized, you can see that long red line. The majority, about 6 people, were not vaccinated. Less than 2 people were partially vaccinated, and only a fraction, so that's 0.45, were fully vaccinated. These numbers, the province, of course, expecting the shift with the vaccine passport's arrival, which is just over 2 weeks away on September 13th. A lot to change. Tanya.
All right, thanks so much. That's our Zara Premji reporting live. If you are unvaccinated and plan to attend university this fall, prepare to get tested. Many of BC's major post-secondaries will require students to disclose their vaccination status ahead of the new school year. It's a measure bringing relief to many, but as our Susanna De Silva is finding out, the logistics of how it will work are still TBD, with the fall semester starting in a matter of days.
Along with paying their tuition, students at several universities will also need to tell their school whether they have been vaccinated.
Well, right now we're in the process of setting up a system unique to UBC that is designed to meet the needs of our community.
The province's research universities, UBC, UVic, SFU, Thompson Rivers, UNBC, and Royal Roads, say the staff and students who refuse to self-declare or who are unvaccinated will be provided with rapid testing.
None of us expected to see the spike that we've seen this early in the fall with the COVID cases. And we know that we need to pivot quickly. And the university sector's done that before.
But they're stopping short of mandating vaccines, something the province has said it wouldn't do, but many are calling for, including the law faculty at UVic, which said in a letter to the board schools are within their rights to do it themselves.
Well, this is the plan and approach that was developed in consultation with government and in consultation with many health agencies over a period of time, and we think it's the one that best meets the needs of our community.
But the details, including how students will self-declare, where and how often rapid tests will be required, enforcement, and consequences for those who refuse, are still being worked out.
It is certainly cutting it close to school, but I think better late than never.
UBC Student Union says it is a good step, but questions the reliance on self-declarations and wanted to see a requirement for all.
Why is a movie theater treated so differently from a lecture theater? And we see that you're going to have vaccines required to enter a movie hall, but not a lecture hall, where arguably it's actually more high risk and students are sitting really side by side and closely together.
A sentiment echoed by many on campus.
Everything's just happening really fast, and I don't think UBC is really up to speed with the way that everything's been evolving.
To me, I'm still uncomfortable with the fact that people still, it's not a requirement to be vaccinated.
As for other post-secondary institutions, plans vary. Emily Carr says it will require proof. The University of the Fraser Valley says so far it is sticking with what has been mandated by the province. Susanna Da Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
A strong reaction on both sides hasn't slowed days after the province announced its vaccine card mandate. Starting next month, you'll need to be immunized to do things like go to a restaurant or work out at a gym. But more and more businesses are vocalizing their defiance, insisting they will not enforce the new health order. As our Michelle Gassoub reports, they say it's a government overreach and a violation of customer privacy.
We are being enforced to enforce something that we don't feel right about in the first place.
Some businesses against BC's vaccine card program hold anti-vaxxer views. That's not the case with the Esquimalt business owner Brendan Marshall. He says so far he's followed every protocol the province has put in place, but he feels this one is a step too far.
Let me be clear. We are not encouraging anyone to not receive a vaccine. This is about people's personal privacy. This is about people's choice and what they do with their body. And we feel that this is just overreaching.
It's a touchy subject for some, but surveys show a majority of British Columbians are in favor of a vaccine passport. And in the days since it was announced, thousands of people have gotten their first dose, not wanting to be shut out of restaurants, gyms, concerts, and more.
The majority of restaurants are really happy about this. I think that the reason is that if we do this, we should never see a restaurant close again or have to close in BC again, because we'll be, fully vaccinated people coming in. Now we have the mask mandate.
Some are already trying to bend the rules, selling fake cards before even knowing what the real ones will look like.
The forgeries that you talk about may appear, but I don't believe they'll be successful. And with respect to enforcement, it's not unlike with respect to nightclubs or the hospitality sector. If they have difficulty with patrons, they call law enforcement. And that's what I would expect would happen with respect to the vaccination card as well.
But Marshall says it's simply not the same as asking for ID at a nightclub.
And we just feel that it's a lot to put on the industry, and it's a lot to put on individuals that really don't feel comfortable with disclosing that information. Now, of course, there's some people that are fine with it, and that's fine too.
On September 13th, 1 dose of vaccine will be required to eat at a restaurant. On October 24th, that jumps to 2 doses. Similar programs are also being introduced in Quebec, Manitoba, and Ontario. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
On Vancouver Island, the tally of protesters arrested in the past few months has surpassed 800. This week, the CBC returned to a blockade where activists claim violence has continued and police tactics escalated. Our Adam Vanderswan is near Fairy Creek and shows us media access has also been challenging.
So we're standing just about 7 kilometers up the Granite Main Road, just northeast of Port Renfrew. This site is one of the old-growth logging blockades that RCMP and demonstrators have been in conflict at for months.
You are here, standing, an unceded Pachidat territory!
Just over a couple hours ago, police arrived to enforce the injunction today. They were met with around 40 demonstrators who, as you can see, they surrounded themselves around this tall tree structure here, where, as you can see, someone has harnessed themselves near the top. Police are incrementally moving everyone back so that they can access the tree to get the person down. Just beyond that, across a little bridge, 2 demonstrators have secured themselves inside a ditch. Where police are currently attempting to extract them.
Got to get machines in and out, right?
Demonstrators are having to actually move their tarps and their tents up the road as the police move in order to bring down this demonstrator who's at the top of this tree here. We arrived at the police checkpoint at the start of the Granite Main Road at just before 10 o'clock this morning, where we met with a media liaison officer who told us that we would not be able to drive the 7 kilometers up to this demonstration to witness what's going on here. And the police said that they would not be escorting us up in one of their vehicles as well. So in order to get up here and witness what's been going on, we've had to walk 7 kilometers uphill to this blockade with our heavy equipment. And we expect that we will be walking a total of 14 kilometers today in order to get back to our van. Adam Vanderswan, CBC News, northeast of Port Renfrew.
Thank you, Adam. And we have heard from the RCMP now, and they are assuring us media and the public should have access to the roads within the injunction area. An update now to his tragic story on the weekend. RCMP now says speed was a factor in the crash that killed 3 junior hockey players. The vehicle slammed into a tree early Saturday in Surrey's Fraser Heights neighborhood. Parker Magnuson, Ronan Sharma, and Caleb Reimer all died in the crash. All 3 teams were members of the Delta Hockey Academy. According to investigators, their vehicle was traveling way over the speed limit. The investigation is ongoing. All this week, we've looked at the plight of Afghans desperate to escape to Canada. And tonight, we have the story of 2 vulnerable asylum seekers desperate to stay in Canada. One is a teenage girl from Afghanistan, the other a young gay man from Syria. As our Renee Filipponi tells us, both are caught in the middle of red tape and terrified they'll be forced to leave.
The calm Arifa finds here is a relief amid the uncertainty in her life. The teenager from Afghanistan came to Canada as a student 2 years ago.
I'm only on study permit, and my study permit is expiring August 31st. I was really scared.
Afraid to go back, she applied for asylum last year and is waiting on any word about her refugee claim.
The situation that is in Afghanistan right now, it would be kind of scary to go back.
Not just scary, but dangerous, as many try to flee. Arifa's family is stuck in Kabul. Not only are they an ethnic minority targeted by the Taliban, but her late father was part of the Afghan army.
I've exhausted all efforts.
This immigration lawyer says normally there is a response in a couple months, but some clients have been waiting more than a year.
They can't work, they can't study, they can't open a bank account, they can't get a social insurance number.
Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada say the delays are due to COVID, and they continue to work as efficiently as possible to reduce processing times.
It's been hard because I can't really do anything. I got into all of them.
This student says he's struggling to find housing while he's in limbo. We are withholding his name because of security concerns. He came from Syria and has since come out as gay. Not only has his home country been in a civil war for more than a decade, members of the LGBTQ community also experience violence in the deeply conservative country.
I wanted to be out and build my life on my own and not be really afraid in Syria. The possibilities I could have by just being who I am is just this really, it's a small detail, but at the same time it's a really big detail about who I am.
And for those waiting for word, it's all about possibility and their hope for a safe future. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, Victoria.
He was criticized for a lengthy absence as wildfires burned across BC, but today the Premier traveled to the front lines of the fight. He spoke from Logan Lake, where the Tremont Creek fire came dangerously close to town. John Horgan thanked crews province-wide and promised to reimagine how BC spends money fighting wildfires. He's vowing to bring before the legislature a funding boost over 12 months with a goal to avoid drawing on emergency funds when fires flare and threaten communities.
The way we have fought fires in BC historically, going back many, many years, is a notional amount of money in the budget, and if you overspend that, you just find it through contingencies. And I don't believe that we should be putting our communities at risk based on contingencies.
He says the province has already spent about $500 million on what's been one of the worst wildfire seasons in the province's history. That's 3 times what was budgeted for this year. And let's bring in our Amy Bell now with a look at the forecast. So, Amy, we had a little brief mini stretch of rain, but it looks like it's not lasting very long.
No, it's not. We have already headed into the sunshine, and that is where we're going to stay. But we did have those cooler temperatures and showers yesterday and for much of the week, and that has certainly helped improve the fire situation, at least in terms of the danger rating, though we still have many areas that are moderate, none except this one little area in the extreme. However, as I mentioned, we're heading into a sunny stretch, and we are going to see those temperatures rising right across the province, so we will have to keep an eye on things. Taking a look at tomorrow, we are seeing another system moving in, but that will bring a lot of unsettled weather to the northern half of the province. South and downward, we're going to be dealing with this sunshine, and it is going to, as I said, get warmer and warmer for the next several days. Taking a look at our weekend forecast, we'll start off with a little cloud tomorrow, but then we'll brighten up and warm up to 21, 22 on Sunday, and back to 19 on Monday. And that, of course, is near the water. It'll be closer to the mid-20s inland. And then looking further ahead, we're still looking at sunshine as we head well into next week for much of the province.
All right, we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks so much, Amy.
You're welcome.
The Vancouver Whitecaps have fired head coach Mark Dos Santos in the midst of a roller coaster season. He was named head coach in late 2018 and presided over the club for 2.5 losing seasons. The team is more than halfway through this season, and they only have mustered 5 wins, good enough for 4th last in the conference. The Whitecaps also fired assistant coach Philip Dos Santos. The team said a change was necessary to achieve their next steps. Mark Dos Santos commented on the exit, saying he was thankful to the players and staff and excited about the future. The team's director of methodology, Vanni Sartini, will fill in as acting head coach. And thanks for being with us tonight on the CBC News at 6. I'm your host, Tanya Fletcher. And if you're not already doing it, you can always watch our program live on our free app, CBC Gem. You can always catch us on Facebook as well, and YouTube and Instagram too. Well, still ahead, a day after that horrific bombing in Kabul and the end of the Canadian rescue mission, questions about who was left behind and what's next. And thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. One of the most distinctive features of Prince Edward Island is the island's red cliffs. They were formed millions of years ago, and some may contain clues to creatures and plants that existed back then. Have a look.
Now, the rocks on Prince Edward Island range in age from about 310 million years old on the west side of P.E.I. And as you travel east across the island, the rocks get younger. And the youngest rocks are on the east side of the island, which are about 290 million years old. So the iconic cliffs that make up Prince Edward Island are what we call sedimentary rocks, and these are rocks made up of sediments like sand and mud. And they also deposit in layers as well, one on top of the other. So that's why we tend to see these somewhat stripes in the cliffs. Now, right now we are looking at a big, thick layer of sandstone, which was actually deposited in a river system back in the Permian period 300 million years ago. And to give you an idea about how long these rocks take to form and how much time is represented here in the cliffs, about 1 inch is equal to about 1,000 years in time. So this entire cliff face that I'm beside right here represents tens of thousands of years in time. When Prince Edward Island formed, the area would have had lots of trees, but you wouldn't have seen any grass, you wouldn't have seen any flowers, because they literally didn't even exist yet. Ferns were the main ground cover back in the Permian period here on Prince Edward Island, and their fossils have actually been found here as well. So what we're looking at here is a type of fossil wood from what we call a tree fern. Tree ferns are actually made up of roots. So the circles that you see preserved in this fossilized wood are actually roots that make up the trunk of the tree. Right behind me here we have a fossilized tree. So what's really great about fossilized wood here on P.E.I. is it tends to be a lot harder than the sandstone around it. So the sandstone will actually erode away, leaving behind the harder tree in its place. Our province is known for all of the beautiful beaches we have here, but people are walking the beaches every day looking at these beautiful rocks, not knowing exactly when they formed, how old they are, and the fact that they could potentially have fossils in them.
Welcome back, and taking you overseas now to Afghanistan. And yesterday's bombing in Kabul happened at the gate into the airport, killing at least 169 Afghans and 13 U.S. service members. But as the CBC's Carolyn Dunn tells us, many Afghans returned today, their desperation growing.
Outside the Kabul airport, armed Taliban members are blocking Afghans from getting through. Desperate families are still making their way there, hoping to get onto one of the final flights out. Even after yesterday's deadly blast made it all too clear just how dangerous it is. Today, the Pentagon revealed what it thinks happened and didn't.
We do not believe that there was a second explosion at or near the Barron Hotel, then it was one suicide bomber.
One suicide bomber, believed to be part of an ISIS faction, made their way through this crowd and to the gate. U.S. President Joe Biden hinted at increased but secret extra security protocols now in place.
Got a detailed briefing about yesterday's attacks and the measures they're taking to protect our forces and complete the mission. And we will complete the mission.
Evacuation flights of U.S. citizens, foreign nationals, and Afghan allies have resumed. More than 12,000 people flown out in 24 hours after the bombing. About 500 of those at the request of Canada. But there are hundreds of thousands more who want to leave. And so borders like the one with Pakistan are crushed with people looking to get out. The United Nations is expecting about 500,000 Afghan refugees from this crisis. Inside Afghanistan, food and medicine already running short.
The outside world needs to really step up and remember when we're talking about the ordinary Afghans, they've suffered immensely over the past 40 years from everything you can think of, from earthquakes to massacres to wars to droughts.
And there are real concerns. People who have already been through so much will be left without once Afghanistan's harsh winter sets in. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, Washington.
Well, there are no more Canadian evacuation flights out of Kabul, but the federal government is telling people trying to come to Canada to stay put as it works on a plan B. Ottawa says it's secured hundreds of seats on an American plane, but an unknown number of people still stuck in the country are unable to leave before the U.S. troops withdraw next week. As our Ashley Burke reports, the crisis thousands of kilometers away is hanging over the election campaign here.
It's a struggle for Ahmed Maghari to reach his family in Afghanistan.
Can't reach them.
His sisters, aunts, and in-laws all hiding in an abandoned building. He says they're in danger of retribution from the Taliban because of his job with the Canadian Armed Forces, and says Canada has left them behind.
I will say to the Prime Minister and his cabinet that you have failed us, and that is an unforgivable betrayal.
That's why Liberal leader Justin Trudeau's comments today hit a nerve.
They are bragging about the mission that it ended before it's barely began.
We compare favorably and strongly to just about every other of our allied countries in terms of how strongly and actively Canadians work to get people out of Afghanistan to safety.
Trudeau today on the defensive, saying the government is trying to find ways to help more Afghans while pitching the Liberals as the humanitarian party, focusing on his government's record from the 2015 campaign to resettle refugees.
I think a lot of Canadians can't help but reflect on this situation in this election to what we lived through in 2015, when the Conservative government at the time was not stepping up to welcome Syrian refugees.
Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole now saying he will support Afghans who resist the Taliban, something Trudeau wouldn't commit to today.
Political support for people trying to keep the Taliban out of certain parts of the country, and material support in terms of intelligence, in terms of logistics support, in terms of satellite imaging.
The NDP lacking details.
We need to do everything possible to work with our allies
to support getting anyone and everyone that we can support to get out of Afghanistan at this point.
Minister said that Canada is working with other countries to urge the Taliban to return the airport to a state of normalcy, an effort to get humanitarian aid back into the country and to get more people out on commercial aircraft. But there's still uncertainty, officials say, around if the Taliban will even agree. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
And it is day 13 on the campaign trail. Justin Trudeau is taking on vaccine protesters who keep showing up at his events. And as David Thurton reports, the Liberal leader is also battling the Conservatives over the need for vaccine passports.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Please get vaccinated.
Justin Trudeau delivering a message to protesters and supporters today. He says the choice in this election is clear between him and Conservative leader Erin O'Toole.
He can't tell Canadians why he doesn't think everyone boarding a plane or a train should be vaccinated. Those are his choices, and they're the wrong choices at exactly the wrong time. That's what's at stake in this election.
Trudeau is squeezing O'Toole on this wedge issue. Conservatives believe Canadians should get vaccines but should not be forced to. Liberals support vaccine mandates and vaccine passports. Today, Trudeau sweetened the deal for provinces and territories that get on board, promising to create a $1 billion proof of vaccination fund for premiers who introduce passports in places like this restaurant.
A vaccine mandate for non-essential businesses is a good idea. It keeps people safe, it encourages everyone to do the right thing, it keeps our businesses open, and it keeps our economy rebuilding.
Not all regions across Canada have signed up. So far, British Columbia, Manitoba, and Quebec have committed to the documents. The Conservative leader says he will respect the decision of the provinces and the territories.
It is their decision to try and balance off making sure people are safe. We fight the fourth wave of the pandemic together.
Depending on how bad the fourth wave is, O'Toole's position could increasingly become difficult if freedoms are rolled back and lockdowns return. At the same time, Trudeau could face blowback for politicizing vaccines. David Thurton, CBC News, Ottawa.
Following the findings of unmarked graves at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School, some Indigenous peoples were mobilizing to cancel Canada Day. Now some First Nations voters hope the movement's momentum will translate to the federal election. As the CBC's Sam Sampson shows us, some say it's more important than ever to have your voice heard at the ballot box.
Can't ignore us anymore.
Tara Martinez says this is the most important federal election yet, based on what she experienced in July.
We have water, the water's free.
Martinez and hundreds of others filled Winnipeg's streets on July 1st, not celebrating Confederation, but calling attention to the unmarked graves of former residential school attendees and the colonial pasts of Canada's governments. The Winnipeg mom from Little Saskatchewan Cree Nation says there's a sense of urgency since the summer.
A lot of us are realizing the importance of voting and who we vote for.
My ancestors have been canoeing and I do feel like a connection to them.
For Riel Carrier, it's that connection that helped him decide to vote for the first time a few years ago. The political scientist from Cumberland House Cree Nation in Saskatchewan says voting can be a difficult decision for some Indigenous people.
Does it mean I am surrendering my self-determination and participating in a colonial state that's being actively, eliminating my peoples? Is that what that means? Or does it mean I'm aware of all of that, but I still want to have my voice heard?
Carrier voted for the first time in the early 2000s after turning to the values in his treaty.
I come from Treaty 5 territory, and the underlying philosophy of the treaty is, it's possible to share. With Wetaskiwin, it's possible to share a territory.
It's a right that we should not just throw away.
Mary Burton is organizing a candidate forum next week in Winnipeg North, a federal riding with one of the lowest voter turnout rates in Manitoba. In 2015, Indigenous voters helped put Justin Trudeau and the Liberals into power with a record-breaking turnout. Now Burton hopes Cancel Canada Day ignites political action for this election.
It's a very colonial system, but it's the only system we have right now. Our Indigenous systems, we're trying to bring those back, but they're not there yet.
The best way to get there, she says, is to fight for it, something she's done by voting in every election she can. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A university in Toronto is getting a name change. Ryerson is named after Egerton Ryerson, who has significant links to the establishment of the residential school system in Canada. As Jessica Ng reports, the school's board of directors voted yesterday to change the university's name.
I mean, it's pretty incredible. We got what we wanted.
Métis grad student Sam Howden says they're thrilled Ryerson University has committed to changing its name.
We really do need to continue to put the pressure on the institution itself to not try and distance itself from this history, but take true accountability for it and be very transparent.
Like Howden, some staff and students have been calling the school X-University. There has been growing pressure on the institution to change its name in recent years, coming to a head in recent months amid a reckoning with the history of residential schools.
The university is losing opportunities, is losing students, is losing faculty, losing great possibilities.
Egerton Ryerson is widely considered an architect of the residential school system. The Standing Strong Task Force has been examining his legacy.
His involvement shifted and changed. So there wasn't a persecution of him, more of a really thorough understanding of the actual impact that he had.
Joanne Dallaire is an elder and an Indigenous relations advisor to the school.
There's no way that you could read this report and not see that just the truth to it, the common sense to it.
Other recommendations include sharing educational materials about the historic figure's history and providing more opportunities to learn about Indigenous history and Indigenous colonial relations.
I'm delighted. I think these are the recommendations that reflect the values of the university and also the aspirations of the community.
In June, the Egerton Ryerson statue was toppled by protesters and beheaded amidst discovery of unmarked grave sites on the grounds of former residential schools across the country. The new name change is just the latest in a series of changes. The university's School of Journalism announced 2 student publications, including the Ryersonian, will be renamed before the upcoming school year. In May, the university's law school was renamed after Lincoln Alexander, Canada's first Black MP and federal cabinet minister. In 2015, they did a rebrand just to update font and colors on posters. That alone cost $200,000. And the school has until January 2022 to figure out a plan for this new name change. Jessica Ng, CBC News, Toronto.
Coming up, an abrupt change of course after vowing not to implement a vaccine passport. The Doug Ford government will. Why the change in Ontario and the reaction next.
Picturesque, tortuous, and treacherous, Kicking Horse Pass in the Canadian Rockies. It's here that an 80-mile stretch of forbidding mountains straddling the Alberta-British Columbia boundary presents the last major obstacle to a century-old dream, the Trans-Canada Highway. The scene is Stephen, British Columbia, where the highway will cross the Great Continental Divide at an altitude of 5,000 feet. This section is by far the trickiest, costliest, and most hazardous to build. Costs have gone up to $300,000 a mile, but the safety record is excellent. The engineers plan a 24-foot pavement with graded gravel shoulders, gentle grades, and smooth curves. That means that sometimes whole sides of mountains must be blasted out. Follows the one-way trail that pushed through the pass by miners in the early 1800s. Since the capricious Kicking Horse River winds its swaying course back and forth from one side of the canyon to the other, 22 bridges will be needed in the Kicking Horse Pass stretch alone. Although this is the most challenging section of the Trans-Canada Highway, the road itself is still far from completion. 60% of it must yet be constructed. The 5,000-mile highway is expected to be finished in 1961. Except for Quebec province, which is not participating, the project is a joint federal-provincial effort. Construction is not yet underway on two stretches of more than 100 miles each, one in Newfoundland and the other in northern Ontario. The remaining 4,700 miles are considered passable, although almost 2,000 miles are as yet unpaved.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We feel that this is just overreaching at this point.
With respect to enforcement, it's not unlike with respect to nightclubs.
Passport pushback. Voices grow stronger from some business owners digging in against the province's vaccine card mandate. Will there be repercussions for those that don't require vaccines to enter?
Totally understand the idea that they can't force people to be vaccinated and they can't force you to show that you've been vaccinated.
With so many students coming in, it just makes me personally just feel uncomfortable.
How will the fall semester shake out for post-secondary students? More and more schools announce their own requirements and an alternative for the unvaccinated. For some, anything short of mandatory immunizations doesn't go far enough.
I don't believe that we should be putting our communities at risk based on contingencies.
And this wildfire season has racked up a $500 million price tag and counting. It's drawn the premier to the front lines, vowing to bolster future wildfire efforts. Will throwing money at the problem be enough to ease anxieties and curb frustrations? It is an abrupt turn of course, but the Ontario government will implement a vaccine passport after all. The details are still in the works, but as our Hannah Thibodeau reports, the pressure from the Premier's health officials may have been too much.
Early next week, Ontario is expected to announce some form of vaccine certificate. It's better known as a vaccine passport. Now, these passports could be used in places like gyms, restaurants, or even movie theaters, for example. Now, sources say the passports will be discussed at a scheduled cabinet meeting on Tuesday. And while some in the Ontario cabinet are completely opposed to these passports, sources say the program will go ahead. Now, there are other provinces that are well on their way to implementing a vaccine passport, like British Columbia, as well as Quebec. Now, last month, the Ontario Premier, Doug Ford, said it was a hard no to vaccine passports, firmly rejecting the possibility of implementing them. Ford said he resisted the idea because he doesn't want to, quote, split society. This was on July 15th. But clearly, the Premier has changed his mind and is expected to announce a vaccine passport. The reason for this, my sources are a few things. The first one being is that public opinion is moving further into favoring these vaccine passports. Not only that, the numbers of COVID cases are on the rise, with the Delta variant becoming more predominant in Canada and in Ontario. And then finally, kids are heading back to school. So expect that announcement early next week.
The CBC's Hannah Thibodeau reporting. A Montreal Island hospital is reeling tonight after a link was established between a patient and an ER nurse who was not immunized. Both tested positive for COVID-19. As Jennifer Yoon reports, a fellow nurse is calling out his unvaccinated colleagues and the government.
The vaccine's free?
Nathan Friedland works as a nurse at the Lakeshore General Hospital. He works in the emergency room, and after working in an overcrowded hospital during a pandemic, he says he's tired of trying to convince colleagues to get the COVID-19 shot, especially now, as he says more and more unvaccinated people are coming into his ER.
It's frustrating when you're trying to fight this pandemic and you're working with colleagues that aren't vaccinated. It's very frustrating.
Quebec Premier François Legault says the government is making it mandatory for healthcare workers who are in prolonged contact with vulnerable people to get the jab by October 1st. But Friedland says that mandate should have come in much earlier.
We're the frontline staff. We should be vaccinated. We should have all been vaccinated months ago. The fact that we're still talking about this is ridiculous.
Quebec's largest nursing union says they are in communication with their stakeholders in light of the situation, but refuse to comment further. Previously, some in the union had expressed concern that the mandate would make some healthcare workers leave the public system, which is already dealing with a labor shortage. This patient's right advocate says it's a trade-off he's willing to make.
Between the risk of having everyone contaminated and losing more health personnel, and having a few leaving because of this mandatory vaccination, I will take the first and make sure that everyone is safe and vaccinated.
Brunet says if there are any legal challenges to the vaccination, he's ready to stand by the Ministry of Health. Friedland, for his part, thinks it shouldn't be this complicated.
We all have licenses that we worked hard to get, and when you get hired as a nurse, they make sure you're vaccinated against things like tetanus, polio, measles, and if you don't have those vaccines, you have to get them. Why should this be any different?
Jennifer Yoon, CBC News, Montreal.
Well, still ahead, they're driving people, well, squirrely. The unique solution to tackle the UK's furry rodent problem next. And here is a live shot at 6:41 at Victoria's Harbour from the Royal BC Museum. And after some rain, the sun is set to return for the weekend. Will dry out and warm up. Amy will have all the details on just how warm it'll get coming up.
My name is Lawrence Brennan. I'm the Executive Director of the Yukon Canoe and Kayak Club based in Whitehorse, Yukon. This year, or the last 2 years with this global pandemic, paddling has exploded in the Yukon because it has been a safe way to still recreate and get out and enjoy the outdoors during COVID. There's families, want to introduce their kids to the benefits of paddling. There's the people, just looking for something new to try. There's the social aspect of paddling where, you're new to town, you want to try something new. There's people there for the adventure, exploring new rivers, doing multi-day trips. There's people there that just are happy to hang out, enjoy the sun, and have a nice afternoon float.
There's so many rad people in the paddling community. That's a big part of what makes it so special here in the Yukon.
Our goal and our focus is to not only help people get involved in paddling, but make sure that when they're doing it responsibly, doing it safely. Because at the end of the day, it's only fun if everybody comes home. The water's been high. It's been high for a long time. On the other side, it's been really difficult to teach people and get people in, especially in the Yukon River here, where already we have so few eddies to teach in, and now they're disappearing because the water is coming up so high. The Yukon Kayak Club, we're here to help inspire and encourage and enable Yukoners to get out and enjoy the many physical, mental, emotional benefits of paddling. We want everybody just to have a good time, come home safe, and make sure that we are taking care of our Yukon rivers.
Welcome back. This next story may sound like a riddle. It's not. He doesn't have any arms, but he's great at hugging. Cody, the wayward boa constrictor, caused quite a commotion last night when he escaped from his South Granville home. Police reported the 8-foot-long Colombian constrictor went missing at 9 o'clock last night. Anyone near Granville and 14th was urged to keep an eye out for the reptile. According to the VPD, the owner went to sleep and woke up to find the slithery serpent had fled. Thankfully, the owner found this sneaky snake curled up in a warm nook in their apartment around midnight. So Cody found a warm nook. I want to know where. The oven? Like, where was he?
I don't want to know anything about Cody.
I wonder how well those people slept in that neighborhood that night.
I don't think well. We
No.
actually had a lot of people contacting the newsroom this morning when I was there asking if he had been found.
He took over social media for
People
a few
were
hours.
concerned,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, Cody's safe. Now we can report it. How's the weather looking this weekend, Amy?
It's looking not too bad, actually. We had cooler weather. We had some wet weather, especially yesterday, but we've really rallied for a little more sunshine and summer-like weather for the weekend. Well, not for the entire province. We still have some very unsettled weather to come for the northern half, but for the southern half and for us here on the coast, we are in great shape. But we'll take a look what's going to happen. So tonight we'll see the second system arriving, and as I mentioned, it'll push up towards the north and then will cause some instability in the central parts of the province. But then down in the southern part, we are looking at a lot of sunshine and those temperatures just getting warmer and warmer. So I think a lot of people thought summer had maybe started to pack it in yesterday when it was so cold and wet, but definitely that won't be the case this weekend. You'll still want to have your sunscreen handy. Taking a look across the board, you could still see a few showers in Tofino, not unusual, and then you'll brighten up to some sunshine and a high of 18. Comox at 21, 23 in Nanaimo, and this cloud will be a little bit heavier in the morning. We will start to clear out as the day continues. You'll get quite warm as you head out into the Fraser Valley, so we're looking at about 24, 25 for Abbotsford and slightly cooler for Hope. We are definitely, as I mentioned, seeing some wet and unsettled weather for the northern parts of the province. So Dees Lake, good chance of thunder and lightning and just a high of 13. Prince Rupert, unfortunately, you're bearing the brunt of that system once again, and we'll see it moving in from the north and central coast. Unsettled in Prince George, and we certainly will keep an eye there for any thunder and lightning strikes. Same for the Williams Lake areas. Those areas have been so dry, although those cooler temperatures have really helped with the firefighting efforts. Looking great, though, for Kelowna, though we are seeing that temperature beginning to rise once again, and it has been the cool weather that has really helped out the situation there. Cranbrook, sunny and 23. For our 5-day, we will start off with a little bit more cloud overnight and early tomorrow morning, and then it'll brighten right up, and then we're just heading into a nice, warm, sunny stretch with those temperatures usually in the low 20s most days.
Well, we're pretty much into the summer finale territory now, so we shall enjoy
Last
this
little
weather.
kick of the weather, yeah.
Okay, thanks so much, Amy.
You're welcome.
And let's return to our animal news now. Though they may look cute and fluffy, gray squirrels are driving people nuts in the UK. And they're being blamed for the dwindling numbers of the red squirrels that are native to Britain. The invasive species, originally from North America, now number in the millions. But as our Chris Brown reports, British scientists have come up with a crafty way to curb the population.
Don't let their innocent, nut-eating ways fool you. Gray squirrels are the foot soldiers of a rodent invasion of Britain's parks and forests. But Sarah Beetham and her team think they've found their weak spot.
They love the hazelnut paste.
Using this specially designed feeder that only gray squirrels can get into, her team mixes a tasty, nutty paste with a contraceptive, rendering all who nibble incapable of reproducing.
From the studies we've done in woods so far, we're very confident that individual squirrels should receive enough of a contraceptive.
This kind of fertility control represents a breakthrough in dealing with invasive or unwanted animal species without actually having to kill them. Gray squirrels were brought here almost 100 years ago from Canada and the United States, but they're a lot more aggressive and bigger than the local red squirrel. And these guys have completely taken over. There are now 3 million gray squirrels in the UK, more than 20 times the number of red squirrels. Not only do the greys steal their food and take over their habitat, they also strip the bark off and kill majestic oak trees, which has caught the attention of Prince Charles, who helped set up the UK Squirrel Accord to try to save the red squirrel. Kay Haw heads the organization funding this work, and she says the economic damage from invasive squirrels is bad and getting worse.
over the past 40 or 50 years, invasive species such as Japanese knotweed and grey squirrels have cost the country about £5 billion. And that is thought to be underestimated.
Why not just either shoot them or kill them in a trap and be done with it?
Culling clearly works to an extent, but it requires a lot of effort.
Giovanna Massé is one of the world's top experts on fertility control, and she's already had success curtailing wild boar populations in Europe.
They care deeply about these animals and they don't want to see them dead, but they want the problem to go away. So fertility control seems to be a reasonable option to explore.
There's still more work to do, but this research in the Yorkshire woods suggests just a few traps with the contraceptive concoction could make up to 70% of a squirrel population incapable of breeding. And that would take a lot of the swagger out of Britain's grey squirrels. Chris Brown, CBC News in Yorkshire.
Up next, a diving forager will have you salivating with his Chinook salmon dumpling recipe. Get your skillets ready. That's coming up.
As soon as I got into running, I knew about the race, and I actually, when I used to live here, hiked Signal Hill Trail pretty regularly, and accidentally came up on Signal Hill as they were finishing a Cape to Cabin. I was like, that looks crazy. There's no way I could do that. But now that I'm into running, and I like the challenging long runs, I've got to give it a go. I'm down a total of about 187 pounds. I think that's about 30 or 40 from when we last talked. Oh, I feel good. It's hard to describe how much energy I have every day. No aches and pains, always ready to wake up and go for a run. Last time we spoke, I ran the 10K race that I was prepped for. I did a personal best. I beat my goal time of under 60 minutes, did 58:30. Now I'm training for a half marathon in September. The drive out here is always a little bit intimidating because, you know, every minute you go, that's when you gotta run back. But I feel good. I'm in my peak week for a training plan. I've been running a lot lately. I feel pretty fit, so I think it'll be okay. You sometimes hear the same line a few times. Whoa, you've like lost a whole person. You've lost my body weight. Or I wouldn't recognize you. No, I mean, it feels good. Living with it, you don't think about how much it really is in the broader scheme of things. But for folks who haven't seen me in 2 years, I imagine it's a little bit of a shock. It was like super unexpected. You know, I thought the stories would go out. It would, you know, maybe inspire some folks. I would always have folks reach out and ask about weight loss tips, ask about running, ask for meal tips. But then when it got picked up really big by CBC, it got picked up by CNN, I had just hordes of people reaching out, trying to add me on Facebook from all over the world. That was a pretty wild couple of weeks, but also kind of weird because we were in COVID and you couldn't go see anybody and it was all digital. So it was really interesting, but I've met some good folks through it, had a lot of good conversations, and I think a lot of people are hopefully inspired by it and are doing their own journeys. The whole point when I first talked about this back in January and share what I do on Instagram is all about, I can do it, so can anybody. Let's have a conversation about it. That's always been the goal, is to help have some sort of community around this about being healthy. And I think, with all of us kind of in the pandemic together, we all collectively have the time. We were trying new things. Why not try some new things that work on ourselves or work towards goals like that? I've done. I'm a very goal-oriented person. Without a doubt, I'm going to try and run the Saskatchewan Marathon in the spring, and that's the full marathon. I've got a few things kind of planned in the back of my mind in Saskatchewan's winter. I started running during the winter, and I'm kind of built for frigid temperatures. So a minus 55K, a minus 20K, those kind of sound appealing to me.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell. Here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Support sustainable agriculture and celebrate local food with Gloria Makarenko at Feast of Fields at Home. Learn more about the Gourmet Harvest Festival at farmfolkcityfolk.ca. And from September 2nd to 5th, enjoy free outdoor performances, a virtual art walk, exhibits, and more at the Fort Langley Jazz and Arts Festival. Go to fortlangleyjazzfest.com for more info.
And a warning with this next story, it might leave you feeling hungry. Spearfisher and freediver Andrew Chin is sharing another dish with us, this time trying his hand at salmon fishing off the coast of Vancouver Island and using that chinook to make dumplings. Have a look.
After a long closure, the season for chinook salmon has just opened up here in British Columbia. I'm Andrew, a freediver and spearfisherman. It's been 15 years since I last went to Vancouver Island, and today we're back on the boat with Captain Alex. Being more of a spearfisherman, I've never gone salmon fishing before, so I'm relying on Alex to teach me everything that I need to know to get some fresh fish. Chinook salmon, or king salmon, are some of the best eating fish we have in BC, and they definitely put up a fight. Out of the 5 species that we have here, they grow the biggest and they have the highest fat content. And fat is flavor. This is the first salmon I've ever caught, and it's gonna be the perfect ingredient in today's dish. So today I'm going to be making some dumplings with today's catch, this chinook salmon. And while dumplings are relatively easy to make, it's definitely a labor of love. It's a great dish to make with friends and family and for friends and family. Growing up in Canada as a child of immigrants, I was definitely aware of the things that made me different. Things like food. And while food can bring people together, that wasn't always my experience. Dumplings were something that I used to bring to school as a kid, and I used to feel embarrassed by them. While other kids had their sandwiches, I had the weird Asian food. Experiences like this made me feel embarrassed of my family's food, and in turn, my culture and ethnicity. But now, Asian food is everywhere. It's super popular, and everybody eats it. It's funny to see how things change. The things that I once shied away from, I'm now embracing. And the foods that people used to think smelled weird, they love. And sometimes that's food like dumplings. And using pre-made wrappers from the store makes it easy for anybody to make these. Salmon isn't the most traditional ingredient for dumplings, but one of the things that makes dumplings so great is the effort and love that you put into them. And for me, part of that care and effort is in the ingredients that I choose, so using this fresh-caught salmon just makes sense. And by keeping it simple with just a few aromatics of ginger, garlic, and green onion, and a little seasoning with soy sauce, oyster sauce, and sesame oil, we allow that fatty richness of the fresh salmon to shine through. I'll be steaming these in these bamboo baskets for about 5 minutes, just until the salmon is cooked, so they stay nice and juicy. And while that's going, I'm making a spicy dipping sauce with garlic, soy sauce, rice vinegar, sugar, sesame oil, and the famous Laoganma chili oil. While dumplings are simple to make, they're definitely time-consuming. But sometimes, things that take the most amount of time and love to make are the most worth it. Spending all this time making foods like this, it's like I'm reclaiming time lost running from my culture and background. And while it may not have been spearfishing, I'm super happy to have caught my first chinook salmon and to be able to make these dumplings for the guys on the boat.
And you can always find our news program online at cbc.ca/BC. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. Your next local news is right here at 11 o'clock with Zara Primji right after the National. Good night and have a great weekend.